Welcome to The Interzone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Intelligent Intranet. I'm Mark Cashman, and I am flying Han Solo today. Chris is off gallivanting the world, and we will definitely check in with him when he gets back. On today's episode, we first talk with Bill Bliss, the platform architect and head developer for ecosystems on Microsoft Teams Engineering. And then we'll chat with Wictor Wilén, who is a global innovation lead for the modern workplace, a senior director at Avanade. The real value of this show at the very end of it is to give you insights into what does it mean for Microsoft Teams to be an offering as a platform, that meta OS that's bringing all of the value of productivity around teamwork, of all the things you can do to bring in and have combined, consistent, and of course, custom experiences in the hub for teamwork, a lot of extensibility potential for developers of all kind, and custom experiences, big and small. You'll hear us talk a lot about the potential of Microsoft Teams. You're also going to hear some things that grounds in reality the art of the possible. From Wictor, we hear what he's actually doing and building at Avanade for experiences in Teams and experiences in SharePoint. And of course, what he's talking about with his customers. And we'll get a real good level set of what Bill and his team do to make that possible for worldwide development on a very, very large platform in Microsoft 365. There's a lot of things that you can do around consistent approaches to how you develop code for SharePoint, for Microsoft Teams, when you think of the value and the extensibility and the consistency of the Microsoft framework, or what we started off as the SharePoint framework. But when it comes to all of the pieces in the toolkit, by the end of this episode, you'll have it very much grounded in your head, what's possible, and I hope a tickler in your brain of what it is you want to try first to build and extend Microsoft Teams. To start to get that grounding, I want to play a snippet from Mike Amerlan, who is a Microsoft Senior Product Marketing Manager, very much focused on development. This is from his Ignite talk that was titled Building Modern Enterprise-Grade Collaboration Solutions with Microsoft Teams and SharePoint. You'll hear in Mike's own words the value of this platform and how those products come together.
Teams was designed to be extended and customized. So even in the first preview, there's a number of different extensibility points, a concept of bots, concept of tabs. But over the past 3 years now, I think we've added a number of other different capabilities on top of Microsoft Teams. Basically, anywhere where you see a menu, chances are there's probably some sort of way to go customize it. So there's now new extensibility for the activity feed. You can actually do things like link unfurling. So if somebody pastes in a link, you can actually get a rich preview for it. There's a concept called messaging extensions, which maybe I'll show just super briefly, but you can actually embed rich components inside of conversations. The calling and meetings APIs at Ignite, those are now, I think, generally available. So you can actually do rich things with calls and meetings. And then, of course, it's connected through Microsoft Graph. So there's rich APIs for accessing conversations, for provisioning new teams, and for packaging all those things together into manageable applications. But the really cool thing that we've just provided in the last 6 months is this ability to take SharePoint applications like those web parts and actually bring them inside of Microsoft Teams as components as well. So if you build SharePoint Framework web parts like I just did, you can actually bring it inside of Microsoft Teams as an application. So all those experiences will work just across them.
I think it's valuable to know how Teams was designed to be extended and customized, and of course, to be able to see all those very cool things that you can do. Again, art of the possible, art of the possible. Coming up next is our discussion with Bill Bliss to discuss the strategy and approach to designing and delivering Microsoft Teams from a platform perspective. So we are now joined by Bill Bliss. Bill is a platform architect for Microsoft Teams and really nice, a founding member of Microsoft Teams team. And you have quite a history before Teams was anything. So before we get into some questions that we have for you, Bill, welcome to the show. And if you could tell us a little bit more about who you are.
Oh, thank you, Mark. So, yes, I've been in the industry for quite some time. This is my second tour at Microsoft, as they say. I started in 1987, right out of college, and my first computer was a 286 with a hard drive and I think a 1.4 meg floppy. Or no, it was 1.2 back then.
I was going to ask, what about memory or RAM, or if there was any specs there?
Oh, boy, I think maybe it
in
had...
the K range still?
It was still in K. I don't remember exactly how big it was, something probably This was even before the days of EMM386.sys. If you remember that?
I don't, so I'm just going to age myself there.
Oh, my goodness. Well, anyway, that was something on the order of, I would say, probably a megabyte, maybe 1.5 megabytes.
Okay. So a ton of memory, right?
It was
and
back
I bet
then.
it was about the size of this recording studio. It
was actually about the size of your normal desktop.
Okay.
But if you remember, those were in the days when Bill Gates said, why would you need anything more than 640K? So, yeah.
So you boomeranged. You came in, and then when you came back, where did you land when you made your second occurrence here at Microsoft?
So I had stayed close to my manager at Microsoft when we built Microsoft Outlook, Brian McDonald. And I was back up in Seattle working at Rapster, which became Rhapsody, which became Napster. And I reconnected with a bunch of people up here, and one of them was Brian. And so we had dinner with I had dinner with him and his wife, and he told me what he was up to at MSN. He was running MSN at the time. He was also responsible for the Bing apps, they were called, which were on Windows 8, but also Windows Phone. And I was really impressed with the team that he had built and the infrastructure they had built and so forth. So when he said, "Would you think about coming back?" I said, yes. and then I came back actually to work on the iOS and Android versions of those mobile applications. And that went from a semi-skunkworks project to the number 2 priority in the division when Satya came on board as the third CEO of Microsoft.
Excellent.
And then they said, well, we need to have that be part of the mainstream MSN effort. And so I said, okay, so I ended up doing something else at that point. But I've been working with Brian ever since I came back in 2013.
Yeah, and obviously he's led big things like Outlook in the past. Obviously a lot about what we'll talk about today with Teams.
Yep.
In its early phases of what I want to dig into first. But even before, what were some of the things that grounded your history that's not Microsoft that people might be interested to know?
Well, that's a good question. So one of the things I've tried to do in my career, because I've done a lot of different things from program management to general management to acting CTO. And one of the things that I found is that the more people you manage, the further and further away from the technology you get in terms of the details. And so one of the things I always tried to do is 2 things. One is try to get more technical whenever there was something, especially pretty interesting, some new emerging trend, whatever, starting with JavaScript and the internet and so forth, but also new business models like software as a service and web-based businesses and so forth. So I tend to, look for new opportunities in areas that I don't have a lot of experience in, either technical and or business-wise, and go after them. And I've been fortunate enough that I've, had the opportunity to do that. And Teams was just the latest example, actually.
I was going to say, I think you just gave the definition of what Teams is.
Yeah.
We have had a previous episode where we talked a lot about the value of Teams itself and its integration with the Power Platform. And for particularly this episode, we wanted to get into the platform aspect. And I think my first question to you, as the architect behind what it is now, how did you decide what needed to be extensible about Teams? And I know that translates into forms of bots, tabs, connectors, and other components. But how did you first think, this Teams thing we have, it can't be just an out-of-box black box. But when you decide, how are we going to make it extensible so that it can be an at-scale service? What were some of the things you thought about?
Well, that's an interesting question. And ironically, I have just written a memo recently about that history, so it's kind of fresh in my mind. But what's interesting is that the platform itself, at least pieces of it, they didn't really originate with Teams. Some of them kind of were just something that we had to do. So, for example, the chatbots and bots in general, if you remember back, I think it was, 2015, 2016, I can't remember what year it was. It was going to be the year of conversational bots. And at the time, there was so much hype in the industry. Some people even said it was going to be bigger than mobile, which of course didn't happen. And it was kind of overblown. And I personally was a little bit skeptical that anybody really wanted to, have a command line interface for something, at least for everything anyway. That actually is what I questioned. It wasn't so much that it was useful in certain cases, but that you wanted to use it for everything, like mouse and tapping and that stuff still works. Why do you need to fix it? But at any rate, so the conversational platform and bots and bot framework in particular were something that we just had to do. We were a chat-based platform, a communications platform, and of course we had to do bots. Connectors, if you recall, and still are actually, a feature of both Outlook and Teams. And it was an effort of the Exchange and Outlook, the Exchange extensibility team actually, that built the connectors platform. And they said, well, we only should do this once as a company. And we said, okay, that makes sense. And so they built it, and we came up with an interface so we could talk to them and they could talk to us with minimal amounts of overlap and a fairly simple contract between the two systems. And that's what we built, and that was connectors. And if you recall, a lot of the apps in the Slack, the integrations in the Slack catalog were that connector style thing where something happened in an external service and you wanted to generate a message to be posted in a channel somewhere. So there were a lot of those. I think there's probably close to 100 right now. And having another team actually do that for us was a big boon to our platform. The tabs feature was one that we organically developed. The idea actually, I think, really was deserved. The credit goes to Brian. We had this envisioning session just before we started active development on teams, right after the team was started. About 6 of us went to Hawaii, and we had kind of a retreat there, and we kind of thought up some of what became the core foundational principles of teams and so forth. And one of them was tabs. And the idea was, well, one of the coolest features about teams and channels is the idea of a channel where it creates a shared context for a set of people and a subject, right? And so we said, well, there's already a conversation there. There's going to be files there from SharePoint, of course. Well, why don't we allow other people, other apps to share that same context? And that's where the idea of tabs were born. It took a while for us to solve some of the authentication problems and make sure that it was secure and that we had a development story and so forth, but that became tabs. But it then kind of fast forward to where we were in the state where we had bots and we had connectors and we had tabs. And there was really nothing, under the covers there were some relationships, but really there was nothing unifying them together. And when we started thinking about, well, a developer story that talks about this feature and that feature, and they're all a little bit different, that was just going to be confusing. Who wants to think about a capability or whatever? So we made a conscious decision to say, all right, let's treat these as capabilities of an app. And we came up with a way of packaging apps, and that's where we came up with the idea of the app package. And the other key idea, which we didn't realize right away, but we started to invest in later on, and we laid the foundation early, was this idea of multiple app catalogs. Okay, so we have one app catalog, which is the store, but in a sense, the list of apps in a team is a catalog of sorts. Behaviorally, that's kind of how it works. And then in, I think, 2018, we introduced the idea of a line of business enterprise app catalog. And so for us, there can be any number of app catalogs, and they can have different governance, they can have different ways of how they're populated and who can populate them and so forth. But at the end of the day, they're just a collection of these application packages. So anyway, that's the kind of foundation we added is, first we started with these raw capabilities, and then we stitched them together into this idea of an app and then app catalogs.
I think the bold move, I remember when you, and also when the Outlook team introduced this concept of bringing information from outside of even the Microsoft stack. And sometimes for different workloads and different product groups, it was competitive or at least complementary in a different way. That was a little bit of a challenge. How exposed is this platform to things like Trello versus Planner or, any file story beyond SharePoint and OneDrive. But to the benefit, I think, to the end user is however a customer is structured with where their content lives today, they may be moving to our cloud, they may be keeping things in other places. The real value of your extensibility model, and of course what you promote is the actual individual tiles that you click on, I think complement really well. And I just wanted to also say I'm waiting for Whobot to be able to write a blog for me. I'm still waiting for that chat experience to be able to write a blog through the Whobot.
So Bill, I'd be really curious to hear how you would respond to this, because one question that we get fairly often, especially when we're dealing with our partner community and our developer community, is they get the idea of Azure as a platform. They get the idea of M365 as a platform with content services and security services.
Back-end services, platform type things.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so when we say, well, you should be thinking about Teams as a platform, how do you help distinguish those two modalities in a developer's mind?
The answer is actually fairly simple, but it starts with the idea of what the Teams platform was built for in the first place. And the idea was to create a way for external services, external apps to expose their features as if they were native features of Teams, right? So if you have one of those services, if you have one of those apps, or if you have something that you want to do that Teams doesn't have and you need to do that, you can build that app from scratch. So the idea is, hey, I want to be able to do something that I want to use a tool that I already have, or I want to extend the experience that people are in many hours of the day in a way that allows them to access those features, that functionality, with just a few clicks without ever having to leave Teams.
One of the things that you mentioned in your Ignite talk, and just for our audience, Bill gave a talk at Ignite in 2019 that was titled Microsoft Teams Architecture Update, which I'm assuming you do a lot, and it gets refined and lots of new stuff all the time. But one of the statements you made, you said everything runs on Azure,
yes.
which I'll let you address how true that is or what dependencies you take. But can you explain how that has helped accelerate or at least isolate the benefits for scale, resiliency, what we do globally, and maybe even talk about some of that dependency, good or bad, as far as you've seen everything running on Azure?
Sure. Consider the services that were built while Azure was being built, or maybe before, like Exchange and SharePoint. Now, there are pieces of Exchange and SharePoint that are ancillary services that are on Azure, but for the most part, they run on the clouds that were built while Exchange and SharePoint were being basically packaged and developed and delivered as Office 365 services, as workloads, as we say. Well, we had the luxury of coming along when Azure was already there, right? And so when you think about what you have to do when you're deploying services at scale, you have to build out machines. You have to get them ordered. You have to make sure they're in the right regions for data residency purposes. For the government cloud, there's a whole set of things that I won't go into here, but believe me, they're very different and very stringent. If you're running a service, you have to do all those things anyway. And it just so happened that we were fortunate that we can outsource that to the Azure team. That's what Azure does for us. So we don't have to worry about buying machines or provisioning them or worrying about updating their operating systems or all the things you do when you run data centers at scale all over the world. So we were able to expand much, much faster than we ever were able to do because that was all done. A lot of that was done for us. So things like building out of new data centers, things like handling edge security and operating system security and physical security and all those things that are part of running a secure and compliant service at scale, those are things that are just taken care of for us by Azure.
It's interesting because that's sometimes the verbiage that you used is how we would describe the value of Microsoft 365 to our customers.
Yes.
But it's interesting, you are Azure's customer internally.
So to our corporate customers, to our enterprise customers and or frontline workers or whatever kind of customers are for Office 365, it doesn't make much difference, I suppose, because to them it's just a service. But for us who are actually trying to deploy a service at scale, not having to worry about those things is there. So if you look at who staffs the Office organization, there's a lot of people who do have to worry about some of those things. So like the way Exchange works at scale is its own proprietary model that they did early on. It was a rewrite of what came before and so forth. So it's interesting. And they also, Exchange for example, has their own way of doing like failover. What's interesting about Exchange, I don't know how many people know this, everyone who has an Exchange mailbox, there's one hot version and there are 3 passive versions and they're replicated. At any point in the day, your physical mailbox, Office 365 mailbox will change between those 4 mailboxes several times a day so that they can update the others and so forth. And so that's something that's very, very sophisticated. A lot of companies who run SaaS services or websites, they have failover. But if you don't practice failover and recovery, it doesn't work. Well, Exchange does that many times a day for everybody's mailbox. And they've made it so commonplace that it just happens all the time. Exchange has no rollback. If we make if we mistakenly take a bug into production, they don't actually take the old version. They roll forward. It may be the same code as was there before, but it's a roll forward. Anyway, that's the type of thing that Exchange has been doing this for so long that they got really, really good at it. But again, they weren't able to take advantage of Azure.
I know there's a parallel pattern when the Exchange team started to offer multi-geo. That concept of me as a person, I move to a different region, take a new role, same company, same mailbox, but I want it closer to home, wherever now home is. And they were able to architect around that pretty quickly with the expectations for the OneDrive and SharePoint team with those similar bodies of containers that they own. OneDrive a little bit easier than SharePoint. But to follow that same pattern, I think everybody looks at the backup and restore capabilities or the patching and uptime, and then, would plow forward to how can we then scale that out on purpose.
Yeah.
Based on geo.
Yeah, and it's different. I mean, so for example, you look at Exchange, nowhere do you have a place where you enter in your tenant or the name of your instance, your Office 365 instance. Yet with Exchange or with SharePoint, it's something.sharepoint.com. Well, that tells you a lot about their architecture, right? Teams doesn't have that either. It's more like Exchange, where you log in and we figure out at that point how to connect you with where you are in the world. And then multi-geo adds another dimension to that, which is, well, where are you now? Where's your tenant and where are you now? And then how do you make sure your data residency is there and that the data is replicated and so forth? It's harder if you don't know where they're going, right? Because how do you know the data is replicated in wherever they're going? So it's actually a really tough problem. And I know that it's a question that we get fairly often from customers, but we wait for Exchange and SharePoint to solve those really gnarly problems first so that we can actually know how to do it and learn from the best.
Speaking on behalf of our own service engineers in SharePoint, it is a fascinating exercise. It is changing an engine on a car that never leaves the roadway. But it is the exercise of, okay, we have a service which was composed of VMs. How do we swap that for a series of microservices, but maintain uptime and API fidelity across is a really difficult problem.
It's a really difficult
problem. There are
problem.
many times I know that we have thrown our hands up and said, it would be so much easier if we could just start from scratch and not have that legacy. On the other hand, if we didn't have that legacy, we wouldn't have the hundreds of millions of customers that we have.
That's right. And we were able to start from scratch. But what's funny is the minute you have any code that's out there, there's just some other set of problems that we haven't even thought of yet that become really hard or will become really hard for whoever has to solve them.
A couple things have changed recently organizationally, and a lot of people who listen to this podcast have a lot of interest in SharePoint and the related technologies. Of course, Teams is very deeply integrated and related. But because we want to turn the conversation and talk a little bit about choices that you made early on, where SharePoint was a part of the offering or the solution that you then designed around, there have been some new changes in leadership with Brian McDonald choosing to move on beyond Microsoft and some of the reins for Teams, and certainly he was leading some other things, going to Jeff Teeper. So it's pretty fresh and new. I'd love to get your take on
that's right.
that change.
So last week, Brian McDonald dropped a bombshell and told us all that he was retiring and that Teams was going to be run going forward, starting at the end of this month, end of February, by Jeff Teeper. And what was interesting is one of the people who works for Jeff, contacted me. I know I've known him for a long time, and he said, "So, what do people think of the change?" And what I said, which is the truth, is I think most people are, just kind of in shock that Brian left because, there are so many people that either grew up in the Teams organization or came to the Teams organization because of Brian. He has a very good reputation, well-deserved, for being, very innovative and really driving people to create really high-quality products. And I think most people, there are a lot of people who don't know about Jeff, but there's a lot of people who do. And of all the teams that we've been cooperating with from some of the other groups, SharePoint is one of them, which I'm sure you've talked about. And if you haven't, then I can talk about some of them too, I suppose. But from the platform side to our files feature and so forth, we've been working very, very closely with the SharePoint team. So I think in general, people agree with Brian when he said that of all the people that could have taken the reins from him, he was hoping that it would be Jeff, and it was. And so I think people are pretty psyched.
I will try to speak for Chris, but I know for me, I've been a fan of Brian's because I think he's taken on a lot of hard challenges in the past and refined them to the things that we now just take for granted or we use every day, things like Outlook. For me now, Teams, and I think the rest of the world is coming to that same realization. But we also have a great history with Jeff, who's done some wonderful things with moving from a product to a service or scaling out his team in a way that's mindful for customer feedback and doing the right things in the right way.
And alignment with OneDrive has been great.
Yeah, and that's the thing is OneDrive came in from a very different area, from the Windows team, and that's proven really, really a great relationship. And now they're really just the same team. We rarely talk about them separately. But it certainly was to transition a little bit to get your take on not just the change in leadership, I think that's important to highlight, but the value of what was already there, this existing work between the engineering teams, and to break apart some of that from an early concept. I'd love to know when you first decided to make the bet on the file store being SharePoint through some of the latest things you've integrated with. Your take on it from an architecture perspective.
Sure. So from the very earliest days, before we wrote a line of code, when Brian McDonald wrote the memo that became the funding proposal for Teams, the decision was always to be on top of Office 365 groups. So we thought that Office 365 groups was a great foundation, and the fact that it had a really great sharing model, a team-centric sharing model. You didn't have to worry about permissions. It was just about people on the team. And SharePoint was just a SharePoint team site was created every time you created a team. We thought that was great. And we thought it was a really awesome foundation to build upon. So that was a decision we made before we wrote a single line of code. Early on, when we were nobody, as we were talking about earlier before we started the podcast, we were a nobody, right? We were this 50-person team working on a product that, may not even see the light of day. That happens a lot inside Microsoft. It's not that people ignored us, but they wouldn't necessarily go out of their way to do anything special that they weren't going to do anyway. So that was kind of what it was like with the SharePoint team. I think people were like, oh, that's pretty interesting. Brian had a good reputation. Of course, I've known Jeff forever. Brian's known Jeff forever. And so, from that standpoint, it was great. But again, really, we're kind of on our own for almost everything, at least initially. And we would often go to the SharePoint and Exchange teams to ask them, well, how did you solve this XYZ feature? And sometimes we found that they relied on their own, they basically relied on what they had. And sometimes we thought there was a way to solve something and there wasn't. And so we said, okay, well, I guess we're going to have to do that ourselves and so forth. But then once we got some momentum and some, some recognition and started to grow some active users, obviously we knew our active user count had been going up long before we publicly disclosed it, and that was well known inside Microsoft. And definitely it was kind of around then that the SharePoint team said, there's actually some really interesting things there. And that really started some high-level conversations, I would say probably in the spring after our GA in March of 2017, between Jeff and Brian to see that how the two organizations could work more closely together.
Yeah, I know Jeff would often reference their recurring meetings, obviously a similarity of going up with some of the bigger motions to Rajesh and up to Satya. But the way that it played out, it's a lot of work for bigger teams to work together and deliver features. But once they get delivered, the one that I'm thinking that is pretty closely related to an update of how you started was the new files experience.
Yes.
So really taking on a lot of what existed in SharePoint and exposing that not just as an iframe, but in a meaningful way that it's helping collaboratively. But with the power that we, who've known SharePoint for a while, is kind of a no-brainer. Like, that's how you should work with files.
Yeah.
When you have greater needs, and then to pass that through teams that keeps the experience in teams more and more. I know that was one of the big goals. But again, a tribute to how the teams work together to accomplish that.
I would also add that one of the things that there's already been a bit of a track record coming out of SharePoint and OneDrive with integrating with Power Platform, and how do we bring these low-code application services into the mainstream to be a basis of more everyday consumption. This has been something that's kind of been part and parcel of the roadmap for 12 months plus for how do we get more seamless experiences coming from Power Automate, Power Apps, et cetera, into Teams. And so I'm really excited about hearing you describe platform app services. I think should give our audience some enthusiasm for being able to do, 1 + 1 + 1 = 6 or 7, or being able to get much more than the sum of the parts here.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And we've been working closely with the Power Platform team from day one. I think our first integration, it actually predates our platform, even though it's using some of the same things under the covers, was Power BI. And that was one of the first tabs that was built. We built it as a native feature. And we're working on a new one that's almost out that's actually implemented by the Power BI platform that is actually built on the Teams platform, real tabs and everything. So that was our first integration with the Power Platform team. But then also, Power Apps and Flow, now Power Automate. And they also were reaching out to us, very interested in working together. And it's been amazing. I mean, the thing that we shipped with Ignite that I was able to demo, where you can actually create a Teams app from a Power App, that was really slick. Early on, when I demoed, one of the features that I designed was what we call Task Module, which is the ability to have a pop-up tab in a modal app dialog. I demoed the ability to have a Power App in that, which works just great, of course, because that's what Power Apps are designed for. So it's been really great. And what's awesome is that we're talking about. I mean, we're not just talking. We actually are working on even closer integration. And I cannot say enough about how great that relationship is. It's, even though it's a little bit newer in some ways, with a smaller set of people or a different set of people than, say, SharePoint, it has the same type dynamic where everyone just wants to get as much useful things in front of people, in front of customers as quickly as possible, and make them be as easy to use as possible, especially with the Power Platform being that's one of the goals.
So if we have a better understanding of how you've approached the platform, obviously the varying teams that you work with internally, your mention of customers just now, what would you tell our customers or developers who are coming and asking questions, how should I think about Teams as this Meta OS or as this extensibility platform for my users? What do you, when you talk with developers, what's your approach in what you share with them?
Well, it's funny. Meta OS is a term that I think Brian used and Satya has used in the past. It doesn't have a very precise definition, to be honest. But, being having been at Microsoft from the old days, I kind of take as kind of a progression of the things that used to be in operating systems of the past. But I think the big difference is that it's across multiple devices, and it's not tied to Windows. There's nothing. Well, there are some special things about the desktop version of Windows that allow some features in Teams, but for the most part, it's very operating system independent. When you think about what is Meta OS and what to think about in terms of developers, what we think about is some of the new, basically kind of up-leveling the expectations of what it means to be an app and what services you expect. So, for example, notifications, right? That's something that Teams has built in from the beginning, and we would like that to be not even just more aligned with desktop notifications, which have been around for a while. But you can't necessarily. It's not a good place to see a list of all of them. But we think that's one of the things that is expected now of a modern operating system and application environment. But also things like the ability to run on any device with a minimum amount of recoding. That's one of the things that Power Platform can help with, for example, and Flow certainly does as well. So I think one of basically the meta message of Meta OS, so to speak, is that, taking a look at what operating systems have done in the past and how can you extend that logically in a world where the applications aren't running on just a single device. They're running in the cloud. They're running on your local device. They're running on your desktop, sometimes all at the same time. We talked earlier about how, there's actually reasons where you're doing one thing on your desktop and you've got a mobile device doing something related. And it's not just checking your email or replying to a chat. It's actually something to do with the message. Or sometimes it's like, I need to get something for this. I'm in a meeting and I want to get something to one of the attendees. And it might just be simpler to just do it on your mobile device. Yeah. And so there's just a lot of things, thinking about, what does it mean? What is an operating system, and what does it mean if it's no longer tied to a single device?
Yeah, one of the patterns I heard from the OneNote team was they built it where you would have OneNote open on their desktop, but you use your phone to take pictures of what it is maybe the presenter's talking about. So you take the picture and then you type your notes. And I think it's very similar to what you described with Teams. I might be on a call, but answering somebody or grabbing some information from another chat. They're not tied together, I think, is really key for the end user to multitask.
That's right. It is a form of multitasking.
Right.
But, of course, when multitasking was invented, no one had the concept of multitasking across multiple devices, let alone multiple devices running different operating systems. That wasn't even a concept. But now that's something people do every day, even if they don't necessarily think about it that way.
So the message out to developers is consider that is the platform you have to then build against.
Yes.
That it has that capability in addition to, of course, lots of APIs and functionality, but that it has that end user access, can reach the end user in a lot of different unique ways.
One of the interesting things about platforms these days, and what I think about in the platform is when you think about how to solve a problem, implement a feature or a service or, try to change something from doing it one way to doing another, is thinking about where is the code running. And that's sometimes a really difficult problem because now you have code that's running in the cloud and you have code that's running on the device. And you can kind of arbitrarily shift what does what where. At any point in terms of solving a problem. And sometimes when you actually shift, oh, it used to be done on the client, now it's done on the service, or vice versa, you get a completely different way of solving the problem. But also it can be confusing sometimes in terms of, well, how does that work, or how should it work? Or, if we wanted it to do that, how would it change that dynamic?
I also think in terms of guidance to developers, one of the things I try to encourage our partners to think about is to not suffer from a failure of imagination, because we have a fantastic arsenal of partners who in one way or another have composed really web-framed suites of application experience. And granted, there's a nice way to be able to repackage those into teams as is. But again, the advantage that you've had by being able to start from a clean slate, if you were to think about some of those applications with a clean slate where you have the intrinsic application capabilities that you get around meetings and chat and all of the things that Teams does so well, that the things that you thought might have required a web page-based component might be better served by using, adaptive cards and some sort of interaction with Power Platform in a chat dialogue.
It's a really good point. And it's one of the things that I've really learned. If you would have asked me 5 years ago, did you know this? I would have said yes. But in terms of, how I think about it now, I've internalized it much more, I would say. And that is, don't start with the constraints. Start with, what is the problem you're trying to solve? And how does that actually manifest itself in terms of an end-to-end experience across multiple personas and devices with users, right? So just envision, how do you want it to work end-to-end? And end-to-end is very important, and multiple personas is very important, because sometimes you're talking about the tenant admin versus the team owner versus the end user. Sometimes it's the power user who you can count on them to do something more technical that the average person, has no interest or skills in doing. And if you think about how to solve that, and just without any constraints, oftentimes you'll find out just exactly what you said, that the constraints you might have thought were there had you started with just a small portion of the problem and solved that, they go away, right, or it's not as big a deal as you think.
Right, but the flip side of that is the imagination you get with constraints, right? If you went to traditional information providers and said, how would you get news in people's hands daily if you didn't have a giant paper-based manufacturing plant available to you? And the same way you take an application developer and say, how would you deliver these services if you didn't have a web browser available to you?
Maybe the real question is, did you consider the printing press as part of the chat feature?
Well, I have to say no, but maybe we should have. But actually, what's interesting is, so I mentioned earlier that briefly about this idea of the line of business app catalog, and that is really designed, or we believe that the Teams platform is the thing that can be one of the engines of digital transformation inside companies. What we do when we take Teams there is, when we just tell people that, you can build apps in Teams, and there's an enterprise app catalog, they say, well, okay, great. But what really lights them up is when you actually, we do, up to 100 of these a year. We go in with our designers and product managers, and we do these, what we call envisioning sessions, where we actually talk about problems that they would like to solve. Either they want to re-implement it, say, on mobile devices or on a modern platform, or they just want to do some things that are clunky now, what have you. It varies a lot by different customers. And we just do an envisioning session. And out of that comes the plans for apps that they build that, yes, they'll be deployed in the app catalog, and yes, there'll be apps built on the Teams platform. But again, that's not the point. That's just the how. So focusing on the what and not so much the how is something that we do. And it's very, very powerful, because oftentimes it's so easy to say, think beyond the constraints, or don't think about the constraints. But of course you have to. And it's very natural to almost start there. I'm as prone to do it as anybody.
To get a closing question your way, I want to frame it around the what's next. You ran and managed a previous company called Roadmap Integrity.
Yes.
And that might have been a while ago, but certainly I think a lot of the principles that I'm betting to help with how you helped align roadmaps with business strategy. If you were to take the history of what you did with Roadmap Integrity and you bring it into the now that helps ground what you do with planning the Teams platform and the roadmap with what maybe you can share of what comes next, even if it's just broader scale things. What is the roadmap integrity of Microsoft Teams, and where does it go next?
So that's a good question. And I'd have to say that we've gotten a lot better at it over the past couple years than we were when we started. But the key thing to realize is that, people look at things like, slipped schedule dates, or we're going to ship this feature at some future release, and then that time comes and it's not there anymore. And why that happens is far more a function of what was done or not done much, much earlier than it is about, dates and so forth. I mean, I think the mythical man month back in the day from, the story of the IBM mainframe operating system was was the state of the art. And we kind of proved that, no, you can overcome that when we scaled out the original engineering teams of Word, Excel, and PowerPoint, and later Outlook. But again, when you're talking about a continuously shipping thing, which that's really kind of new. Teams has been doing it forever, but it's relatively recent development for Office 365. That's a different set of skills. And when you're doing that, you don't have the luxury of working for a long time and cutting things. You just lose a lot of your efficiency that way. So what we've been doing is focusing on, okay, what are the things that are going to have the biggest impact? And you have to make sure that you focus on things that are going to move the needle. One of the bad things about Agile is that if you don't actually look at it from that perspective, and you say you have a 2-week sprint or a 1-month sprint, you'll find that your feature imagination extends to 2 weeks or a month or whatever your sprint length is, and not much more. And then you'll find that a year later, you have a lot of nickel and dime features that haven't moved the needle much. You've been busy. People have checked in code. There's, a little feature here, a little feature there. But in terms of like something that'll actually move the needle competitively, it doesn't happen. So to do that, you really have to make sure that you, in addition to the things that you have to do just to keep the lights on and to fix security bugs and accessibility and all that stuff, you have to look at the things that are the big ideas. But you don't want to start coding those big ideas until you understand what the problem is. And again, the end-to-end scenario focus, if it's that type of feature. So a lot of it is about having a good planning process in place and making sure that before developers are asked to write a single line of code, they have a good understanding of the problem they're trying to solve and a good understanding of what's important and what's not. And so I can't say that those are, things that are, terribly unique to roadmap integrity, but I will say that, we've gotten a lot better at it as a team. And it is something that I find, when I talk to companies, when I was doing that, when I talk to people about, gosh, we just don't seem to be getting a lot done and so forth, the root cause was always around things like that.
Gotcha. Well, it sounded like through there's a lot of customer feedback that comes through. But even before the feedback comes, it's taking the longer lens of what is the most impactful thing that we've been hearing to date that we haven't yet solved, and then taking on some of those bigger ideas and grounding them before we get started. And along the way, there's going to be a ton of features that probably derive off of that bigger idea.
Yes.
But I just can resonate, obviously, what the SharePoint team has done, what the Teams team has done, what every workload does within Office 365 is there is transparency into what we're doing when we're able to be more definitive on it. And there are some things that, you got to just maybe wait 6 months and we'll expose a little bit more. But I think there's a lot of great practice, and I think a lot of it stems from that type of thinking that you may be grounded in the product way, but now is more of a service with a bit of a different twist.
Yes.
That it's always changing. But thank you for sharing your thoughts.
Yes, you're welcome.
Also, thank you for coming in and sharing a lot about what happens behind the scenes in the broader thought processes for the architecture and certainly the history of. And tell Jeff we say hi.
Yeah, I will. And you're very welcome. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Excellent. We are now midway through our journey of what does it mean, this Microsoft Teams as a platform thing, that API for teamwork. To ground it a little bit more, before we talk with Wictor, I want to play a clip that's all about the American Red Cross and how they customize the Teams experience, a lot to do with how they leverage the Power Platform. But I think from the audio that we'll play here, you'll get a sense of how the Red Cross for their specific needs, leverages Teams as a platform and what they bring inside that Teams experience. So just to be real clear, this is the American Red Cross that prevents and alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies, and their focus is to mobilize the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. So some of the voices that you will hear is Nick Gill. He's a manager from the Service Delivery, Logistics, and Inventory team on the Red Cross. You will also hear from Denise Everhart. She's the Division Disaster Executive. And by nature of them and how they push through volunteers, you'll hear from one of their volunteers. His name is L.V. Spencer. So let's take a pause and listen to how the American Red Cross leverages Microsoft Teams as a platform.
Prior to the supply hub, we had a very paper-based process that involved filling out a paper record, scanning it, emailing it into somebody, and then went through some different routes to finally the person who packed and shipped the order. And that resulted in a 3 to 4 week lead time or order life cycle time from time that the instructor placed the order to the time that the package was delivered. Utilizing Power Apps, we made the supply hub, and that reduced to a 4 to 5 business day order life cycle. From the time that the instructor places the order to the time that my team has that delivered on their front doorstep. So it was really huge.
60 days into that disaster, we still had a persistent shelter population. We decided to use Microsoft Power BI and using some of these Power Apps, pull all the information in together. And that really enabled all of the agencies to work together. And within a little under 30 days, we were able to close the shelter and make sure that everybody had a place to stay.
Anybody in the Red Cross can create a Power App. We're using Power Automate to help increase the automation. We just set up a flow for it. So that's helping us save time. It's streamlining the process. Now with Power Apps, we feel that the data is trustworthy and we can make better and quicker decisions.
And using some of these Power Apps, dashboards, and other systems have enabled them to really see what's going on, to see the bigger picture, to see how they fit in.
Technology has really helped us in trying to fulfill the mission of the American Red Cross. All of those have been great tools that reduce the time that we're spending collaborating and coordinating so that we can really focus in on those that are impacted by the disaster.
My job is to help people. I have the greatest job in the world.
So hold in your mind what you heard from the American Red Cross, and we'll amplify that when we talk with Wictor, who will share more about what he and his company Avanade do to customize and extend for their own use. But the real value is that all of those interactions with his customers. Let's hear what Wictor has to say about Microsoft Teams as a platform. Up until now, you've heard Chris and I talk a bit about the platform. Certainly you've heard from Bill Bliss, who is, from a lead architect perspective, been working on things all Microsoft Teams and enabling others to take advantage of how they can come into that platform and certainly make a lot of customization choices based on what he and the team are doing. To put a real-life lens and, of course, a real business lens on that, we're really pleased today to talk to Wictor Wilén, who is a global innovation lead for the modern workplace. He's a senior director at Avanade, to come in and give us a little bit more about what he and his company are doing, but really as a Microsoft MVP, what he's telling his customers about this Microsoft Teams platform and the general framework of how people can extend Microsoft 365 when you think about it. So, Wictor, thank you for coming and joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Mark. Super interesting discussions.
So, Wictor, I first want to talk about maybe what will look and sound like acronym soup, because you've accomplished a lot of things from a certification perspective, and I know what that means to achieve that. You have an MCA, an MCSM, an MCM, and of course, you're a Microsoft MVP. So with all of those acronyms, is there any one of those that stands out as maybe the hardest to accomplish, or the one, I know with MVPs, you maintain that year over year, that you would have a couple words about?
Yeah, sure. So MVP, first of all, is an award that I'm super proud of, having 10 of them now. So this is my 10th year as a Microsoft SharePoint MVP. But my proudest achievement, I would say, is the MCA, which is the Microsoft Certified Architect for SharePoint, which was sort of an interview and a business case that you proposed to a board, and then before getting the actual certification. But prior to that, you had to do the MCM or MCSM, which are sort of the same, which is the Microsoft Certified Master, which is a 3 weeks on-site training in Redmond with the engineers and the best people in the world on SharePoint. So I think overall the MCA is the proudest achievement, but the MCM is probably the hardest thing because it's so long days and so long nights studying SharePoint in every nitty-gritty detail.
in one of my earlier roles in the early SharePoint days, I was actually assigned to the MCM program to manage and monitor the amount of gray hair that is in an attendee's hair from the beginning of the course to the end. And I will tell you, it's not quite 50 shades of gray, but it's enough to know that there's some wear and tear in a positive way to become an MCM. But I know that acronym soup is something that I would just look at it and think, this is a POC type of person, a proof of certification. So we're pleased to have you, obviously, as an expert and to ground it in everything you've done up until now.
Thank you.
So let's turn to the now. You work at Avanade, and you're in support of their Global Center of Excellence. What does that mean for what it is and what you do for that?
Yes, so I work as an innovation lead for Modern Workplace today, which means that I take a look at sort of the near-term future, what's happening within Modern Workplace, and most specifically around Microsoft 365, since that's what we're focusing on. It's an interesting role where I have the opportunity to try out all the new things, but also going out to our clients and talk about those things. And over the last few years, since this announcement of Microsoft Teams, that has been sort of what I've been focusing on, because there's a lot of innovation happening on that platform. And I actually say platform because I think that's the interesting thing. So Microsoft Teams, of course, you do the onboarding and adoption and learn people how to collaborate inside Microsoft Teams, but the true business value comes when you see Microsoft Teams as the platform for you to do integration and bring those kind of integrations into the conversational context, so you don't have to do that context switching back and forth between your different backend systems, etc. And that's what we've seen with clients, and that is the success after you've done a successful onboarding and really want to get business value out of Microsoft Teams.
And is that a common practice where you internally are maybe the pilot of the pilot? So you're getting, from an early adopter perspective on behalf of Avanade, guidance, direction, implementation, but the learnings that come off of that, and of course your connection to Microsoft as an MVP and working with engineering, then help transition those conversations with customers. So you can say statements like, here's how we leverage Teams at Avanade. Here's how I've implemented it. Here's what the Microsoft engineering team is doing. That leads to, of course, consultative type conversations based on those proof points and successes. Is that fair?
Absolutely. I think that's a good description. So I have one foot on through my MVP and my connections with you guys and folks at Microsoft and the Teams team, so to say, and can give feedback from what I heard from my clients, but also get an understanding of what will happen in the future. And we can then try it out within Avanade, and we are both within Avanade and Accenture is probably the biggest Teams installation right now with almost 500,000 users. And we try out those kind of new things there before we take it to our clients and can work it out with them. And so circle it back to the engineering team, and so the product can evolve over time and be better.
So with 500,000 users using Teams, obviously across a lot of different projects, a lot of different use cases, some that maybe require customization, some that just are pure out-of-the-box conversation files and the exposure of other content. That's what we wanted to then dig in. This show certainly is all about the Microsoft Teams platform, or what they offer and how you can develop custom solutions or bring in custom experiences. And one thing that it caught our eye from what you delivered at the Ignite conference back in November of 2019 was really derived what I think is a perfect title. I won't steal it. I'm not going to steal your title for this episode, but pretty close to what I think a lot of people are interested in. Your session was titled, Build a Microsoft Teams App from Scratch in 20 Minutes, which of course possibly makes a lot of people nod their head. You can't do anything in 20 minutes. And I think from watching your session, you actually did a lot of what you accomplished in about 17 or 12 minutes. But with that in mind, as far as a thing that people can go watch and learn more, let's dig into when somebody starts to build or think about building a custom app or custom experience for Teams. My take on it is you just say, yo Teams, and Cortana and all of the other AI sparts, just create the app, and that's all that you need to do. Is that pretty close?
Sort of, yes, if you want to start from scratch. So Yo Teams is sort of a generator to scaffold out your project and a very good starting point. Or you can clone one of the PNP or Teams PNP sort of GitHub repositories where they have samples of how to build applications, or you can use SharePoint Framework. But I would like to take a step back and first think of what is a Teams application really. And a Teams application is essentially description of other applications. So in Microsoft Teams, we have tabs and bots, etc. And a tab is essentially just a website. So the Teams application in this case, it just points to that website. So if you're a full stack developer or a website developer, you can build a Teams application in no time using the tools you're used to, etc. And I think that is one of the really powerful things with Teams. And a bot, the same kind of thing. If you already built a bot, you can very easily get that into Microsoft Teams, do this Teams manifest, that the declaration of the Teams application. So what you mentioned, the Joe Teams, the Yeoman generator for Microsoft Teams application, does a lot of that for you and create that starter kit, so to say, to actually get up and running. And that is an open source component that we together in the community has built to make it easier for you to build Teams applications from scratch.
Gotcha. Okay, so obviously I'm going to be very upfront with everybody that hopefully I believe everybody might already know. I'm not a developer. I would love to be a developer, but I'm not. My only acronym is my initials, MTK, and that's not certified by anybody but my parents. But knowing what I know about the approach and the transition that we've had going from full trust code to a much lighter weight, much more browser and client-side experience, a lot of the way that people can come into using SharePoint, Microsoft Teams, other applications, endpoints and experiences, it's not that they need to know specifically something about Microsoft Teams. They don't need to know something specifically about SharePoint, as they used to for SharePoint. You used to have not just your acronyms, but a PhD to go into the deep guts of SharePoint. And really the how-to was always much of a mystery. But a lot of what I heard you just describe, and even in the tone of how you described it, you're more describing what are more common tools for web development and for what is more available and, of course, a lot bigger number of developers who know web development versus something that was proprietary for SharePoint in the past.
Correct. So if you take a look at tabs, for instance, those are websites, and you can make them more Teams aware through a very slim and slick Teams JavaScript SDK. So that's if you're a website developer, a full stack developer, that's a no-brainer. But also if you come from the SharePoint side, I mentioned SharePoint Framework. If you do SharePoint Framework today, you can very easily convert them into a Teams tab, your web parts in SharePoint Framework. But also there are quite a few low-code, no-code approaches. You can build a dashboard in SharePoint using web parts and add that page as a tab, for instance. Or you can use Power Apps and Flow, etc. to create even more interesting scenarios around Microsoft Teams. So I think it ranges from all those hardcore developers using Joe Teams or building from scratch up to the citizen developers that using Power Apps or SharePoint to just create their dashboards and portals.
Which I think just translates into the different types of requirements or the want of what people need. They may just be fine with what they can do out of the box, or if they want to take on some things, again, like me, not being a developer, but I'll monkey with Power Apps and Power Automate so that I can, accomplish something that might be simple but doesn't require code. And then there are going to be those projects either really important to a larger team or just something that's more company-wide. So to span those as options, I think also reflects the way that people are going to come at Microsoft Teams with what do I need from it? And if I need something extra, I can do that. Which leads me to what I wanted to ask you before we move kind of to the next topic is if we know the what is possible and we know where, what is the biggest business value driver that you either hear from customers or you push for them to understand when it comes to thinking about Microsoft Teams as a platform?
When I talk to my clients and we talk about the scenarios when what you can use Teams for, and Teams is a collaboration application and those kind of things. But the idea with Teams that it's one app and then it's also mobile. So it's very compelling to a mobile workforce to use Teams and have that on your mobile phone, but also in that same app with single sign-on, with authentication, with all the security mechanism around that, get your other applications as well into that same platform. And specifically when I talk to my retail clients with the large set of frontline workers, that is a very compelling option to have that Microsoft Teams app that does the collaboration, the conversations, the shift management using the Teams Shifts application, but also an integration to their backend systems that they already have or ERP systems, etc.
And are you finding that people are asking more questions because of this new Microsoft Teams endpoint, or they're asking similar questions that are maybe easier to achieve because you can now spend not as much time building and delivering and the lifecycle management, that it's simpler development? Is it a similar conversation, or are there a lot of things that are new because it's this new experience and new offering?
So I think it's both. First of all, it's a very different user interface. If you want to make a good application for Microsoft Teams, you need to adopt sort of the conversational context or using bots, for instance. And bots are quite hard to do unless you're really skilled in doing that. But the whole idea is that you get so much for free. You get the security. If you have the Teams application and deploying that in mobile devices, for instance, you only need to deploy one application. You have very good controls nowadays in Microsoft Teams with app policies, etc. We can pin applications to a certain set of users. So you get a lot for free when you do that. But otherwise, as I said previously, building a Teams application is sort of like building any kind of website or any application today, but they get into that Teams context.
So let's talk about that similarity. And I completely hear the value of, again, the things that the platform offers that we would say in the SharePoint world, things you don't have to build, but certainly can take further and extend. But I also want the audience and our listeners who ask, similar questions or certainly at different events, how does this all come together? You had your session at Ignite, and a lot of the talk was focused on the how to build a Teams app. But if you think about it in the context of Microsoft 365, and certainly for this audience, primarily SharePoint, Teams, and Azure at the top of mind, what are the consistent patterns and practices that you see in your day-to-day, or again, as you work with customers to accomplish what they're asking from you? What is this pervasiveness of the SharePoint framework, of the P&P I heard you reference earlier, or maybe things that we haven't yet talked about that are either common controls, common framework scenarios, or repurposing, across these different endpoints? How would you explain at least what we are trying to promote as the Microsoft framework? How does it all come together, and what are some of those commonalities?
Yeah, I think we will in the future see a much better story than we have right now. There is some differences between Teams development and SharePoint development today, or Office development even. We will see an alignment there going forward, both when it comes to the user extensibility frameworks and the UI, so to say. So that will be aligned better in the future. But right now, there are a couple of very good points. I mentioned the SharePoint framework, for instance, which can work in both environments, both in the SharePoint page, but also as a Microsoft Teams tab. Another example is that we, at Avanade, for instance, we have a bot on our intranet. That bot exists on our intranet, all our intranet pages. It exists as a standalone application. It exists in Microsoft Teams. So essentially, it's everywhere. On my Windows 10 machine, in my Teams mobile device, but also on our intranet. So there's a couple of things we built out this with, and it's all through Azure and microservices. So we have those backend services, but then it's surfaced through different kind of endpoints. Might be bots, tabs, web parts, etc., etc.
And do you hit roadblocks where it might be a short list or a long list of feedback to Microsoft? One of the common asks we consistently get, not so much in a developer conversation, but as I move from app to app, or I'm moving from mobile to web to desktop, if I'm interacting with this same service, and I'll put OneDrive on the spot a little bit, OneDrive Mobile versus OneDrive Web versus things that you can do in the Sync client, which is typically on a desktop, either Mac or PC. The biggest ask that we got in the last couple of years was make it so that the experience is the same, or similar in the way that what I can do on web, which is highly functional and most feature-rich, don't shortchange me when I move to mobile, and also by the time I'm there, don't change the experience so I can't figure out or I have to retrain my users or even myself. Is that something that you find today is from a user experience, because you are building sometimes custom user experiences or one user experience that needs to show up in a number of endpoints? Is that hard to achieve when you think about people moving from Teams to SharePoint, or like you had mentioned, a mobile app that is essentially accomplishing the same thing but in a new experience? What is that from a user interface or user experience perspective?
Exactly. So if you think about if you take SharePoint and Teams, I think they're good examples. So the Teams desktop application and Teams mobile application is fairly similar, and same on the SharePoint side. The SharePoint web application or in your web browser and the SharePoint mobile application are sort of the same. They look the same, feel almost the same. But the big thing that I get feedback from our clients is the transition between Teams and SharePoint. So in a SharePoint site, you might have a theme. When you go to that Teams team later, you don't have that theme. It's always the same kind of colors, etc. There's some differences in UX framework. And that is one of the feedback that I get from our clients, and also through when they do their rollouts of Office 365. That's one of the things that, the users give feedback on.
All right. So one last question on the Microsoft Teams platform, and this is very much if another developer asked this question to you, what would you tell them? I'm starting to develop for Microsoft 365. Do I develop for Microsoft Teams or I develop for SharePoint? I get a lot of questions, what to use when. If I'm a developer, how would you answer that?
So that I would ask them, are you a SharePoint developer or some other developer? So if you're a SharePoint developer, then start with SharePoint Framework and create tabs. However, if you're not familiar with SharePoint Framework, you might start with building a website on your own, as you've always done before, etc. And then that's where your Teams might come into hand. But also one thing to have in mind, so Teams applications is much more than SharePoint web parts, which are client-side only. In Teams applications, you have bots, for instance, they run server-side, and you have connectors, you have messaging extensions, etc. So those kind of things cannot be built using SharePoint Framework today.
Yeah, there's a lot of things in the toolkit that will equate to what you pull from based on what it is you want your app or experience to do. But I think even from what I've been hearing you talk about, and certainly the parts that I know, it's very rarely that you are building an application solely on one part of the platform or only for the experience that people see. There's often something that's happening in the background, whether that's data in a list or that's an app running in Azure, or if it's something client-side that's just running as a web part on a page that's now put in as a tab in Teams. I think what I'm hearing, and I'm not trying to guide the conversation too much, is it's not that there isn't a dependency or an integration between these products. And as a developer, that you're always thinking, what do I need to bring together that may already be together? I may bring in services or data or other, like you said, bots and the smarts behind the bots. That it's never a singular answer. It's what do you need to accomplish? And these things do complement and work together.
I think that comes down to how you design and architect any kind of solution, not just specific for SharePoint or Teams, etc. And a very modern architecture is think about what you have in Microsoft, the Microsoft Graph. Those kind of endpoints which you can talk to from any kind of system or device or whatever, or front-end application. At Avanade, we recommend the same kind of thing for our clients, building out a microservices architecture. And we've done it for ourselves as well, for our intranet, for our bots, etc. That microservice that allows us to integrate all our systems and backend systems to bots, to tabs, to web parts, etc., etc.
Gotcha. Well, you hit a buzzword that it certainly was another thing that I wanted to ask you while we have time with you. You mentioned the microservices that you're building for the intranet. And I know from seeing some of the work that you've done, and I also know from our prep call that you've got an image that you are willing to share with us that is representative of the work that you've done for development on the SharePoint-based intranet. Not SharePoint only, but certainly the site that they go to or the portal that you've built. Can you share a little bit around what you've done, whether it's leveraging the SharePoint framework or other P&P type patterns to design and develop that Avanade, the portal that you use within the company?
Absolutely. So we call it the Avanade Hub, and that is our hub where we aggregate information from everything from news to our learning and development system to the stream videos to we bring in consultants from our chargeability reports, etc., etc. And it's all built on SharePoint Online using SharePoint Framework. On the start page, we most of our components are actually custom built today because we wanted to have a little bit more of branding and look and feel from Avanade, but also many of our applications or web parts today are integrations, as I mentioned, through these microservices to other systems, such as learning development, etc. But we also at the same time wanted to be as evergreen as possible. That means that when you do changes to the SharePoint Online and SharePoint Framework, etc., we want to have should be easy for us to just upgrade that or replace the features that we built with the features that you have released. For instance, a good example is audience targeting on news. That was something we built when we launched this a year and a half back, but that has now rolled out. So we're considering how can we leverage those features in our web parts or use out-of-the-box web parts instead.
And I'm betting that the SharePoint engineering team who does work and talk with you the same as the Teams engineering team that you work with and have worked with would look at what you're doing and probably ask you, how did you do that? Or what could we do to do that at scale so that we can roll out an audience targeting news service that today might not have that, but there are smarts in the system and ways to develop around it based on the platform capabilities that will give you that functionality. And I think one of the key things I heard you say, and I've heard other smart developers say it, is that you're building custom work with the mind in the future that Microsoft might offer that out of the box or make changes to the underlying entities that will affect your solution, and hopefully you do it and design it in a way that it doesn't completely tank all the work that you've done.
Yeah, and then I think this is, for me, that's been, I think, the most exciting part about this project. We launched the first version a year and a half ago, and everything we've done with the Avanade Hub has been driven by either telemetry or user feedback. So everything we do, everything we have on the page or pages are actually being tracked in real time, so we can see what parts are people using, etc. But also we have a very interesting feedback function built into the portal where we can see thumbs up and thumbs down and immediate feedback from our end users. So we drive the whole development team has been agile now for a year and a half, and everything is driven based on that feedback, the telemetry, and what people want to do and how they work with that. And of course, what stuff is happening with SharePoint and on the SharePoint roadmap.
Well, I will tell you from seeing the screenshot that you provided and, of course, insight behind what it took to get there, this is a nice, well-thought-out, customized portal that looks like none other because it looks like what Avanade wanted it to look like. And it's very personalized. You know, we talk about out-of-the-box personalization, and you took it even further, leveraging the Microsoft Graph for the specific experiences you wanted to provide the Avanade employees that signed into the portal and were looking for something or maybe weren't looking for something, but it was very relevant to them. I think hopefully in a good way you'll get a lot of questions off of that the more and more you expose that. And certainly thank you for sharing a little bit here on the show. I want to move just to one last topic. In the realm of the podcast, it's not too far off topic, but from what we've been discussing here, I want to go back into the Wayback Machine, where I know you authored a book that was titled SharePoint 2010 Web Parts in Action. And before I kind of finish the question, I just want to point out, I think that's you on the cover with the top hat. Am I right?
No, not really. I wish I looked that good, though.
I think you maybe were the model for it at least. Yeah. So I'll put that in the blog for sure so people can see. It's a great, obviously at the time, great title and kind of a fun image. But, you know, what you could do with out-of-box web parts plus leveraging an API that lets you build custom web parts. This is using the language, of course, of 2010 with C# or something like VB.NET. But it was no small feat. If somebody's new to the cloud, how would you describe how far the modern web parts have come with that history of what you used to do in 2010? How can we maybe make our resident web part, John Sanders, who I will make listen to this episode and take notes? You know, what are some of the things that you would talk about that you've learned and how to build these modern web parts, maybe even based on some of the interactions you've had off of the web parts that we've delivered, most likely that were in no small part influenced by you?
Yeah, so first of all, so it's 10 years since this book was written, so if you want to move to the cloud, you should not read that book because Office 365 did barely exist then.
Oh, I think it's going to be a hot seller. I'm going to put the link on from Amazon.
Absolutely. It's a collector's edition. So I would say start like this. So web parts is what got me into SharePoint, I would say. It's I think the only thing that is left since all the digital dashboard resource kit and SharePoint Portal 2001 days. But it's been that through time and been such a paramount part of the SharePoint journey. And it has had a couple of iterations from the digital dashboard resource kit into the JavaScript web parts, and then into the C# and BBNet web parts, and now the SharePoint framework web parts, where we build everything client-side using JavaScript and TypeScript. So it's been there, and that I would say it's a foundational part of SharePoint that makes SharePoint as usable and as successful as it is. That's where I started my career. That's where I started building and sharing code as well on CodePlex back in the days before the GitHub was the place to go. And that's how I learned to get close and have SharePoint being such a big part of my career.
Well, I'm going to make a bet. I'm going to put the link to the Amazon. Big sales are going to come. And the way that I will know is not by looking at Amazon sales. I'm actually going to see how many requests that I get to implement a new Tag Cloud web part and a new Silverlight-based media web part.
Yeah, the Silverlight-based one, that's going to be popular.
That's coming back. That's coming back. Well, I wanted to thank you for your time today. Thank you for truly living up to all of your acronyms, explaining what Yo Teams really leads into, and of course, the conversations that you have with your customers about the Microsoft Teams platform and beyond that works into that. Very excited that you were able to share that visual of your Avanade hub. And of course, book sales, maybe I'll get just a small percentage of the sales. How's that sound?
Thank you, Mark. It was a pleasure.
But yeah, thank you for supporting everything that we do here. Great feedback. And I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you for joining the show.
Thank you.
Let us turn now to frequently asked questions. We have a lot of great experts from a Microsoft Teams platform development perspective, and I'm dying to know, as you are, what are their most frequently asked questions? Let's turn first to Bill. So, Bill, what is the most frequently asked question that you're getting this week?
The number one question we get without fail, day in and day out, week after week, is somebody finds our email address, which we do have one, and they get to us, and it's not even a developer question usually, and they say, I want to use Trello, but I can't find it in the App Store. And the reason why is because it's been turned off by their tenant administrator. Oh. It was either on before and it was turned off, or it was never turned on in the first place. There's no way to know. What we do is we always find the page in our admin documentation, and we say, file a support ticket with your tenant administrator or with your IT department and tell them how to turn on Trello. And that solves it. We are still looking for a more elegant way of doing it, something that is more obvious, because what I figure is that for everybody that figures out a way to contact us, there's probably 90% more that don't know how to reach us and are just frustrated. So I wish we had a way of solving it.
Well, we could just tell those users, oh, it's called Planner inside Teams.
My bet is that tenant admins may take one big bold step and says
no third-party apps.
Yeah, no third-party apps will be exposed through Teams or other places. But they may have, in another vein, approved the use of something like Trello for X and Y, Z, just never through another application. So it might just be a conversation that they get started. So your answer is it's absolutely there as long as it's permitted by your...
Yes. And even though that solves that one problem, there's actually the broader thing which you alluded to, which is actually pretty interesting. When we look at the root cause for why apps are turned on or not inside a company, we asked that question. We asked the tenant administrators. And so that's why we've been investing in things like application policy that allows people to do exactly that. You can allow Trello for a set of people, but not everybody. And then also security and compliance. A lot of people, if they do want to turn on Trello, they have to go through a security and compliance review with a different part, usually a different part of IT. And they ask a bunch of questions that they had to get manually. So we started an effort for security and compliance and attestation and now certification for Teams apps. And now there's a central place you can go to see the data handling policies of Trello and every other app.
Great. Well, very supportive, obviously. We are open and available to lots of third-party and, of course, first-party, and that it is the customer's choice.
Yes,
the customer may have different bodies that are making different choices, but ultimately it's their decision.
That's right.
Okay. Well, great FAQ. Thanks, Bill, for sharing. Chris, you have a FAQ this week?
Absolutely. One that comes up continually in this space, in some weeks more than others, is about the order of operations on migration. It usually begins with, we have a bunch of containers. They may be on premises, SharePoint sites, or file shares, or what have you. how should we think about moving those into the cloud? And the answer we usually give them is to think about getting those into SharePoint team sites in the first place and then adding teams on top of it. Because the flip side that we hear about a lot is someone says they're doing both things at once. We set up a whole bunch of new teams, and then we migrated a bunch of continuously used content to a parallel set of team sites. And now how do we stitch the two together?
Whoa.
And so it's usually, if you already have a reasonably well-reasoned information architecture, the teams are appropriately named and so forth, move them up, and then we can teamify, not a real word, but those sites to make sure that Teams is coming in appropriately aligned to the rest of your content.
Yeah, and actually some of the messaging for the SharePoint migration tool, which is just the press the button when you're ready, is how to move from an on-premises Teams site into Teams. And just kind of get around the fact that people may or may not understand that, but they should be really clear that you can do that. Teams, has, of course, like Bill mentioned, a team site behind it.
Yep.
And when you're moving content, it's there for you to move to, no different than if you had, done a more of a staged approach, which we certainly want to avoid and not message out.
Yes.
Okay, Wictor, so what is your most frequently asked question this week?
So what my clients ask me most about is the Project Cortex that was announced at Ignite and when they can get their hands on it, because they are super excited about the capabilities of it.
Just so you know, that made Chris smile. So Project Cortex, people are asking about it. I'm very curious. What are you telling them?
So I'm telling them we are working with the Project Cortex team right now. I was in Seattle last week and saw some really amazing stuff, and I think it has a great future. But exactly when it will be released, I can't tell. It's an evergreen platform. It will be released when ready and properly tested, etc. Sometimes the first half of this year is what you told us, and that's what we hope for. But we are continuously testing it together with the team, Chris, Naomi, Sean, etc. But I'm super excited about the future of this and actually going out to show it to clients in a few months.
Oh, I bet you're going to get drilled with a lot of questions. I know that when we first started to run the developer kitchen, everybody that was able to attend that, who was first hearing about the SharePoint framework, I remember at the SharePoint conferences, they were sort of a highly sought after person. And I'm betting that if word gets around that you went to the first content services kitchen, that you will not only just Project Cortex raise the meter of interest, but certainly you will make it sale. So I think come around the SharePoint conference, build. People, if they know that, they're going to seek you out. But hopefully it was a great first experience, and thank you for your FAQ. So my FAQ for this week is a common question that you'd be surprised that I get, but because it relates to SharePoint, people ask, can I bring a custom web part from SharePoint into Teams? They're typically asking, can I bring a web part as a tab in Teams? And the answer is absolutely yes. Since the SharePoint framework version 1.7, I think, you've been able to start to think about what is the experience that you want of a web part as a tab in Teams. And from what I've been told, it's just adding a couple of lines of code. But the whole concept of what the team in the engineering division has been working on is that value of being able to build either a tab or a connector once and use that in SharePoint, or vice versa, like the question asks, to be able to build a custom web part and somehow bring that as a tab in Teams. The answer to both in a bidirectional way is yes. The value is you build once and use in multiple locations. All right. That is enough with the FAQs. You are filled to the brim with a lot of great information about Microsoft Teams and the common questions around them from a platform perspective. Don't go away. Next, we highlight upcoming important events that are near and far. First up, SharePoint Saturdays. These, as always, are an excellent and exceptional opportunity for users and IT, and of course for today, developers, because there are always developer sessions, to learn from and engage with your local community. Best part is we always say they are free, and from their website I can tell everything is still free. So let's talk about two upcoming SharePoint Saturdays. One is on Friday, February 28th, and that is SPS Bremen 2020. This is Bremen, Germany, and historically they have been on a Saturday, and they reached out and let us know that they're going to run things on Friday and see how that goes. So we hope that's a great event. If you're in that area, definitely join in and get all up to speed on everything that you can around SharePoint, OneDrive, Microsoft 365, IT, admin, developer, go, go, go. The second one that we want to highlight is in the Chicago suburbs, and this is going to be at the DeVry University. That's going to be February 29th. Same idea. You're going to get a lot of great content, a lot of great speakers, and again, free. Always join in to a SharePoint Saturday if it's in your neighborhood. They're always fun for networking, great content, and of course, you'll just have a great time. Next up is Ignite the Tour. If you are unable to attend Ignite in Orlando, now is your chance to reap all the benefits of that event closer to home, bringing all of the same technical training led by Microsoft experts and Microsoft MVPs, and of course your personal community getting together to share and train and ask a lot of questions. You can find the nearest city in a link in the show notes, where you also can follow on Twitter the hashtag MSIgniteTheTour. The remaining tour cities for February are Singapore, Prague, and Copenhagen. Look for the SharePoint, OneDrive, Yammer, and Stream sessions. There are 4 of them in a learning path that will take you through SOYS 10 through 40. And please do listen for our dear friend Anna Chu and her new show, The Uptake. This is a podcast that pretty much follows Ignite the Tour around a number of different cities to get a lot of that local flavor of what Ignite offers, but more importantly, what is it the community in those areas are doing, so that people can learn about their personal career journeys, professional learning, how-tos, and more. Look for The Uptake with Anna Chu on the techcommunity.microsoft.com or wherever you get your podcasts. Next, I just want to give a quick hello to SharePoint TechCon in San Francisco, because if you're listening to this at the exact time that we release this episode, today, February 18th, then you might be at SharePoint TechCon San Francisco. So a quick hello, San Francisco. Hope you're having a great SharePoint TechCon. Next up, March 2nd through the 6th is an online 5-day virtual conference. This is driven by the Collab 365 team, and it's called GlobalCon 1. This covers a ton, the latest knowledge and training for SharePoint, Teams, Cortex, Azure, Power Apps, Power Automate, and more. I will be delivering one session that's titled Plan for Governance to Transform Teamwork with Microsoft 365, of course, alongside a ton of other great content from the comforts of your very own home. So I hope you tune in. I hope I can feel and hear you and see you through the interweb ways. You can go to the website that we have linked to register today. And of course, on Twitter, you can follow hashtag GlobalCon1. On March 7th, there is the Office 365 Saturday here in Redmond. If you're in the area, know that a lot of people from the engineering team and from the product management team will be there to support the event and, of course, to deliver some sessions alongside a lot of great other speakers aimed at Office 365 administrators, end users, architects, developers, and a lot of other professionals that work with Microsoft 365 technologies. It'll be here on the Microsoft campus in Building 33, and you can find more information in the link in the show notes. Last thing before we leave events is we want to give a quick shout out to a great event going back to Germany in Cologne. This is called ShareCamp, and this is their 10th time holding this event. It will be on March 7th and 8th, and this is at the Microsoft office in Cologne. This is a very local event, of course, very much in German, so you got to speak German. But there is a great set of people who are the point of contacts who we know in the community as being leads in their area around the Microsoft 365 technology and, of course, historically SharePoint. That's Henning Eiben plus Andre Kramer, Andrzej Doms, Nikki Burrell, and Christian Glessner. The focus is on all topics related to communication and collaboration with the Microsoft tech stack. We'll put a link in the show notes. Hope you can make it. So to all of the ShareCamp attendees and promoters, Chris and I say, Hallo aus der Intrazone. Now that you have a ton of events under your belt, brimming with the possibility of you going there, let's wrap up this episode and certainly put a thank you to our guests. Thank you to Bill Bliss and Wictor Wilén for sharing all of their insights and information about the Microsoft Teams platform. Check out our show page for links to all of what was discussed today and more. Go to aka.ms/theinterzone. And if you're curious about other Microsoft shows, check out aka.ms/Microsoft/podcasts and listen to a new show today. We encourage you to reach out with your questions or feedback for the SharePoint engineering and product teams. You can email us at theinterzone@microsoft.com or on Twitter @SharePoint, @mcashman, and @cmcnulty2000. Please tell your friends and colleagues, spread the word worldwide, local, and beyond. Tell them about the show, what you like about it, and maybe send us some of the things that you'd like us to work on or focus on in the future. Share the SharePoint love always. Subscribe where you get your podcasts. I'm your host, Mark Cashman. You've been listening to The Interzone, a show about the Microsoft 365 Teams-infused intelligent intranet.